Good morning. Well, I think we'll get started. Folks can still drift in as they grab their coffee. Today is our final session of our classes on how to live a Matthew 25 life in a world that doesn't seem to involve compassion. And today's subject is probably one that seems the most confounding. We live in a wealthy nation, and how is it that we still have hungry people or people who don't have a roof over their heads at night? So we're super pleased to have representatives from two organizations that really need no introduction to this church or to Denver, long-established organizations. We'll hear from Gabriella Visani, who is with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. For 40 years, the coalition has worked to prevent homelessness and create lasting solutions for families, children, and individuals who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness throughout Colorado. It advocates for and provides a continuum of housing and a variety of services to improve the health, well-being, and stability of all they serve. And Teva Shanitsky is the co-CEO of Metro Care Ring, founded 50 years ago. The goal of the organization was to keep nutritious local food on the table for everyone in the community. The organization currently serves 1,000 families a week. So please welcome both women to Montview.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gabriella. I'm so grateful to be here today, especially alongside such a wonderful organization that we work with so closely. I'm so grateful for your interest in this topic and all of your work. I can see throughout the building that you all are very involved already in some of the work that we're going to be discussing today. My name is here on the presentation, but we're going to split equally and talk about all of our work that we do and how you can get involved and support us if you're interested. So I'll just give a little bit of a homelessness 101, we like to call it. So we would just like to start with some numbers. As we know, numbers are not representative of people's stories, so we just want to lay the groundwork initially. According to the point-in-time count and the National Annual Homelessness Report, we have over 700,000 people experiencing homelessness on a single night in January 2024. If you've never heard of the point-in-time count, it is often known as the kind of barometer that we set our numbers of homelessness on. It is not an accurate count and is a vast underestimate, we believe. They conduct the count on one night in January where a lot of people often are in shelter and are therefore maybe not counted, or they're staying with a friend. So this is definitely an underestimate, but is a good starting point to understand where we are. So they're not counted, people are not counted as homeless if they are incarcerated, if they're in the hospital, if they are staying in motels or hotels, or if they're couch surfing or staying with a friend, as I mentioned. In Colorado specifically, we estimate that the number is between 18,000 and 34,000 of our neighbors and friends and family members who are experiencing homelessness. So we put this together through a variety of different metrics. We have 22,000 students in Colorado experiencing homelessness, which is a mandatory count by the federal government known as the McKinney-Vento Act. We have 52,000 or more people who accessed homelessness services, and we have about 134,000 individuals without stable housing that were covered by Medicaid. So we try to use a variety of different metrics to pull together an accurate picture of the crisis that we're facing. In Metro Denver specifically, so our neighborhoods, we estimate about 34,000 individuals, and 5,214 people this year are newly homeless. So they were not experiencing homelessness at this time last year of the count, and they are now. So we know that the crisis is ongoing, and you all are more than aware that this is something that affects all of us, and it's visible and it's invisible at the same time. So there are many reasons that people might not be might not be in shelter. So we discussed two things, sheltered homelessness and unsheltered homelessness. Sheltered homelessness is when someone would otherwise be homeless if they were not in a structure or a house or an apartment or hotel or motel. Unsheltered homelessness is they're staying often on the street and sleeping outside. And so we try to differentiate those two because it's a group that is unified by the common struggle, however, at the same time have different needs. So some of the causes of homelessness, I left a fact sheet up there and some information if you'd like to grab it. I see someone has the myths and facts. We like to ground ourselves in reality. So many of the causes of homelessness come from these systems, broken systems, generational poverty, systemic and institutionalized racism, public benefit barriers and restrictions. Even if people want to access public benefits, they are often barred for those for one reason or the other. And access to health care. We'll discuss it a bit, but as you might imagine, you know healthcare costs are increasingly not affordable, and people, if they have one medical emergency, that can often lead directly to their homelessness. So we're going to focus on a few today: the affordable housing shortage, failure to invest in housing, and then criminalization. So I'll try to go through this a little bit quickly. If you'd like to learn more about these causes, I'm going to speak a little bit more towards the how to support and how to help and how we can be good neighbors. But the housing wage, so the wage that you would need to make an affordable, to afford housing in Denver specifically, or the mountain communities as well, is $36 an hour. So almost 37 right now. So while the minimum wage has increased, you would have to work 99 hours a week to effectively afford housing, a 2-bedroom. So even if you can afford housing, let's say you piece together a few jobs, or you get a job that does make you enough money, at 30% of the area median income, which is how what used to be more generally referred to as the poverty line, there's only 26 available units out of 100. So you're going to an apartment, you just got a good job that pays you enough to live, but you're at that 30% AMI. You might not have an affordable housing unit because there's not enough. So this housing affordability, I'll go through this a little bit quickly, but we also have this report online, and it's one of our primary places of research and advocacy because we believe affordable housing is the key to solving and ending homelessness. So in Denver, home prices rose $94 a day between 2012 and 2022. There are over 28,000 empty rental units in the Denver metro area that are on the luxury and middle income area. So you can see them all around town being built, places that don't seem like many people could afford to live there, and they're sitting empty while affordable housing units are completely full. So prior to 1980, almost all all affordable housing was partially or completely federally funded. So housing projects in the 1980s and public housing was funded by the federal government, and now that disinvestment has caused a huge wave of pressure on organizations like ours to provide some of these basic needs and housing for individuals. So I want you to think about a little bit, and I think about this a lot. I have family members who struggle with substance abuse issues. There's a common myth about homelessness that it is substance abuse and mental health. Now, those are factors that can contribute to homelessness, but I know my family members who struggle with substance abuse, the factor that differentiates whether or not they're in affordable housing or one of my family members was living on the street for a while. Those factors are determined by wealth, by family support networks, by support networks like churches, and it is not the cause of homelessness. I know plenty of people living in my apartment building who are using a lot of substances, and they're not outside because they have housing and access to housing. Homelessness is not caused by mental illness and substance abuse, although the narrative would make you believe that. The factors are population growth, low supply of affordable housing. If you're housed and using substances, it's fine. If you're outside and using substances, you're also often criminalized for those actions. So this is something we feel very strongly about at the coalition, and something that we've done a lot of research on. Over 350 anti-homelessness ordinances in cities and towns across Colorado criminalize activities of basic living: sleeping, covering yourself with a blanket, sitting for a long period of time, unruly behavior, which is defined by the person who is approaching that person, and is often administered by people who do not have training in mental health, in substance abuse, in crisis, and often is criminalized, people are criminalized just for existing. If I am outside at the parade of lights and I cover myself with a blanket to stay warm, I'm not going to be criminalized because I don't appear to be experiencing homelessness. People experiencing homelessness are 11 times more likely to be arrested than people with housing. Once you're arrested, sometimes that goes on your record, and then you're no longer able to get housing. So camping bans, as we know at the coalition, do not resolve homelessness. They do rupture trust and connection with the community. If you are staying outside in a tent, the likelihood that you are going to be charged with loitering or some of these other criminalization of basic human life is very high, and you might just be trying to survive without access to shelter. So I just wanted to kind of get a sense of the crowd. How many of you are kind of aware of the Grants Pass decision, Grants Pass versus, okay, great, thank you so much for raising your hand. Love an audience engagement moment. So Grants Pass passed in June 2024. It was this ruling by the Supreme Court that you could criminalize people if there was no shelter available. So let's say Denver Rescue Mission fills up, so all the shelters in Denver fill up. Because of the Grants Pass ruling, cities have started to move, not ours quite yet, but cities have started to move to saying, we can put you in jail even if you have nowhere else to go. So Aurora, Avon, Colorado Springs, Douglas County, Greeley, and Montrose are some of those cities who have decided to take advantage of the Grants Pass ruling to try to solve homelessness through putting people in jail. So some of these personal barriers we discussed are not enough alone to cause homelessness. So what do we do at the coalition? Love this little dog. It's one of the cutest dogs. We do housing, healthcare, supportive services, and advocacy. We work closely with organizations like Metro Caring and other organizations to provide some of the basic needs that people need every day, and Tava will talk about that a little bit. But we do, just to start off, we cover housing. So we have 21, actually this should be 23 as of this year, 23 properties where people are housed, and close to 5,000 households that we house every year. We believe in a model called housing first, and not just believe, but it's scientifically and evidence-based, that housing with supportive services, case management, healthcare on-site is the way to solve homelessness for people, especially who are chronically homeless. So we've had some proven outcomes for some studies we've done. Again, I want to kind of go through this a little bit more quickly because we have reports online that you can do some more research if you're interested in. But if any of you know someone who has gone to college and has stayed in a first-year dorm for the first time when they're 18, that's housing with supportive services. You have an RA who's looking out for you. You have a nurse just down the hall. If you have food and all your needs provided for. And I know when I was 18 and I went to college, I needed that. I needed a support system that could look out for me. It's the same thing with all people. We all need supports, and people who have been unhoused for a long time don't have the networks that maybe I had, even with my family and my friends. So permanent supportive housing is cost-effective, it's humane, and it's backed by data. So we spend approximately $13,400 a year as compared to $21,000 to $40,000 in costs for medical care, emergency health at Denver Health, incarceration, detox treatment, shelter services that go on regardless of whether we're providing them. So if we do not allow people to not go to the emergency room, and we're taking on those costs. So even if people don't view it from a humane perspective, the dollars make sense. So I'll go through quickly because I think I'm running up against my time again here, but we have 14,714 patients served in 2024 housing services or healthcare services. We had 5,000 mental health appointments and patients with 26,000 visits. So we're providing some frontline care that's invaluable to our city and state. Homelessness hurts health. Our doctors often say if I could prescribe health, or if I could prescribe housing the way I do medication, I would. And that's kind of where our organization started in 1984, was with a free clinic. And they realized that people were coming back in for the same conditions, wound care, frostbite, some of those same treatments that they were giving. Well, they would just have them the next 10-degree day that we had. And they opened up housing in 1984 to try to balance the healthcare and the housing side. Supportive services is everything else, including case management, employment services. We have a healthcare or a children's center out in kind of Lakewood area on Colfax, and we have just a variety of services. We have 2 residential recovery programs, one in Los Animas, Colorado, and then one we just opened out in Sage Ridge in Aurora, and people can live there and recover from substance abuse in a humane and evidence-based way that prioritizes their health first and their stability and support system. And then we work on advocacy. So we push state legislators, federal lawmakers, local governments to make the right decisions when it comes to housing that are not only smart and effective, but also humane and kind. So we, this past session, 38 out of 43 bills that we engaged with had the desired outcome. Just wanted to touch really quickly on one of our bills. These are kind of our key bills. We obviously monitored a lot, but one of our big successes this year was housing protections for victims of gender-based violence, including provisions like you can break a lease early if you're experiencing domestic violence. It's one of the most common causes of homelessness, especially for people who identify as women, because they're staying in housing that is unsafe for them because of these limitations. So we worked to try to eradicate that issue and are making progress on that with our wonderful partners. So really quickly, sorry this overlapped a little bit, but you can learn more. Every month we do an education series where you can learn about different topics. We have our reports and issue briefs, which I left over there. We also just work with the community quite frequently to come give presentations like this. And I'll send out this slides. So you can join our email list, find us on social media. But I just wanted to take a second to say that one of the most important things that you can do is what you're doing right now, is learning, asking questions, and leading a life that is driven by compassion and not othering people, not hating people because they are living outside, which is not their choice. And that is a common narrative that we really seek to combat, that it is by choice or that it is people who are different than us. I know that it's not my family, it's my family, it's your family, it's your friends, and people, everybody out there is somebody's child, and I think that's something that we can all connect on with humanity and compassion. So I'm really so grateful to be here today. There's other ways to get involved. I'm gonna just wrap up with some tips. So small gestures can go a long way. If you can make eye contact, wave or say hello to someone, you can give food or money if you feel comfortable, but a lot of people have expressed to me when I'm on street outreach that one of the things that's the most difficult about being outside is that people start to look over you and start to not engage with you as a person, and it can cause trauma and just lack of recognition of your own humanity would be horrible for any of us. So that's kind of something that we always say. And then when you're considering calling the police, if you ever have been in that situation, think, like, what is the concern here? What would I do if that person was not homeless and looked like me, for example? What would your response to me being erratic in behavior in public, or maybe I pass out on the street? Would you call the police, or would you maybe call an ambulance or call a mental health professional? And then you can always just check out what I can do. We just hosted a session that I was really proud of in October called How to Be a Good Neighbor. We had neighbors from around the organization, or around the state, who came in and talked about just being a good neighbor to everybody. So yes, I think that's it. We're going to save questions for the panel, but I really, really appreciate your time, and I'm so excited to introduce Deva with Metro Caring. They do a lot of really, really great work for us, too, in the community. So thank you so much.
All right, I'm just going to set a little timer here for myself. No, you're okay. You did pretty well. You were like 1 minute. You were good. I know you were promised Erik. I am not Erik. Erik is currently out on some medical leave for some stress-related concerns, and so I am here pinch hitting. So I hope you'll welcome me just as warmly as you would have Erik, and I don't disappoint you. I am our CEO visionary. Erik's my counterpart as our CEO integrator. He runs the day-to-day, and I'm kind of forward-thinking and externally facing. I see many familiar faces, so thank you for many of you who support us and volunteer with us. We're always grateful for our partnership with Montview, and glad to be here today. When I was born, my mom was 19 and working in a True Value hardware store in Colorado Springs. And my dad and she got married when I was about a month old. It was his graduation day from the Air Force Academy. And we did a lot of moving around. My brother came shortly thereafter. And as a junior officer in the military, and my mom with her high school degree, she had a hard time kind of getting jobs in different places and would work as a waitress or, very kind of odd jobs here and there, retail. And we often had a hard time making ends meet. And so when I was in first grade, my parents decided to go back to school. And my mom became a teacher ultimately, and my dad ultimately became an attorney. And so we had that kind of American dream story that we're known for as a country, right? That anybody could be socially mobile, and that if you work hard, you can make it happen and you can get there. And so they went back to school and they did that. What we're seeing today, though, is that social mobility is way down, and that over the last 50 years, wages have not kept up with the cost of living. Those core costs, housing, healthcare, transportation, and now even food, have outpaced like 4 to 1, 5 to 1 in some of these buckets of core cost, the wages and the paces that wages have increased over the last 5 decades. And so what we're looking at today is, in the 50 years since Metro Caring has been around, that American dream has become less and less probable, and that our social mobility rates currently in the US are more like those of South American countries like Argentina and Chile, and not like what the rest of the G12 is. And that we have one of the highest rates of inequality in our country compared to the rest of the developed world. So when we think about things like homelessness and hunger, and we think about the world in which we live, this is beyond kind of an emergency circumstance. Somebody has like a hard time in 1 month because they have an unexpected expense or they're in between jobs. This is becoming the chronic daily grind for far too many Americans. And in Colorado, we know that 1 in 6 kids faces hunger on a regular basis. And so what we're looking at in our country today and in our state today is, yes, we are one of the richest countries in the world, and we are experiencing core problems with meeting folks' basic needs. People who are working, people who are living on disability. I have an aunt who is on disability, lives in a trailer park in Colorado Springs. She does not earn enough to put food on the table and keep a roof over her heads and keep her meds and keep herself healthy and stable. And that, if you look at, I don't know how many of you are on Social Security or, have relatives that are, but those checks are insufficient. We know a woman who's in our community, her name is Alice. She worked her whole life, and her Social Security check at retirement is $900. Now, I would like to challenge you to think about, how are you going to find housing in Denver and put food on the table and be able to afford your blood pressure medication like Alice, if that's what you're depending on. And so she lives in a house with 2 men, and she has, they're not reliably able to pay their utility bills, so she has a cooler she keeps in her bedroom because it's important to her to eat healthy. And she comes to Metro Caring for groceries. So far too many folks are not being taken care of in our country today. And these are policy choices. So when we talk about Metro Caring, we have 2 parts of our mission. We talked about that we want to meet people's immediate needs for nutritious, culturally accessible foods, and we want to work to build a movement to end hunger in Colorado. Because I don't believe in the richest country this world has ever seen that we should accept a state where 1 in 6 people have this regular experience of hunger. And nor should we have the number of folks living in housing insecurity that we do. And the 2 are linked. We did a series of house parties over the last year with our community, and we asked what was going on in their lives, what were their root causes. And we heard the housing is unaffordable, transportation is expensive and not in their neighborhoods or in their areas or not reliable. Healthcare is a huge driver. Far too many folks who are struggling to pay for their medications or their treatment for cancer or various kind of very severe illnesses for themselves or their children can't afford to pay the bills and keep these other things going. Public benefits, the levels of public benefits are inadequate, and we know that they're working actively to try to cut SNAP levels. SNAP is food stamps. And right now, most folks who are on food stamps, the average benefit for a household is about $189 a month. I don't know how many of you do the grocery shopping in your household, but I've got 2 teenage boys, and I can spend $189 in like 3 days with the amount that they eat. It is nowhere near enough to actually be able to afford your groceries. And so even if you're doing all the things, buying things in bulk, buying dried beans, buying the rice, you're still going to run out before the month end, and you're still going to need to look to places like Metro Caring. A lot of folks say, well, what can we do through the charitable food infrastructure? What can we do through nonprofits like ours? And those are a place to start. Those are a place to meet folks where they're at today and meet their immediate needs. But we also need to keep our eye on what are the conditions that drive folks through our doors. What are the folks? Why is the line continuing to grow? We've been around 50 years at Metro Caring, and it's that same period where things have been getting worse in this country for folks to be able to make ends meet. And we know that it is the 0.1% with their, the billionaires with their tax cuts, that amount that they just got is like the exact same as it would cost to fully fund SNAP. So we're making choices as a country. And we are investing and providing public benefits, but to whom? And we need to make sure that we keep our eye on the policy landscape and the choices we make in our economy. A lot of times in this country, we talk about the economy like it's something that happens to us. And, oh, you know, you read the news and like this number is up and that number is down, and it's like this big thing. But the economy is a series of frameworks that we construct as a society. It's a series of choices. And so I think it's very important that we take the time to understand what are those choices and who benefits and who doesn't, and to think about how we can live into our values to better create a system where we all can thrive. I'm Jewish, and in my kind of value system, we have this concept of repairing the world, tikkun olam. And when I think about repairing the world, it's not just kind of feeding people today, because that's like a hamster wheel, right? We've grown the charitable food sector, and we've grown the charitable food sector, and we're never able to make it. We're never able to meet the needs. We continue to have that line. And so it's important that we continue to do that, because we don't want children going to school hungry or grandparents, you know, not able to afford their medications. And we need to think about what we can do to come together to demand a better framework for all of us, a more just framework and a more equitable framework. I'm going to check the time here. All right, I'm only at 10 minutes. So I'm actually going to call it and let you guys ask questions. I did not have a slide deck prepared. I didn't have a lot of remarks. But when I had to take Erik to the ER the other day, I was like, I'll fill in for you. And so I'm pinch hitting, speaking off the cuff. Glad to be here, and I'm going to give you guys more time for questions. Yeah.
Teva, you're going to find that we have lots of questions always for our speakers. So.
All right, good.
Thanks so much for being here. What's the percentage of men versus women homelessness?
That's a great question. You asked what percent of men versus women, or what's the gender breakdown. I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, and maybe you do, but we definitely see a higher proportion of single men who are experiencing homelessness. Some of that is due to veteran status, some of that is due to just family infrastructure, lack of support, and kind of lack of social networks in some ways. And there's other causes as well, but we definitely see a disproportionate amount of people unsheltered experiencing homelessness, and part of that is because people experiencing homelessness living outside are more likely to be the victims of violence than they are to be perpetrators of violence. And oftentimes, as someone who is a woman or who identifies as a woman or a non-binary person, they are experiencing gender-based violence at a higher proportion, especially out on the streets, often by people who are housed, actually. And so this is a cause that sort of we worked on with the domestic violence bill and gender-based violence bill, that we want to protect people from becoming homeless, as well as keep them from staying in unsafe and violent situations in an apartment or a home where they're not safe but have no alternative to leave. So the gender breakdown of people living outside is kind of a ever-changing and in flux, but I would say the proportion of those who are able to safely somewhat live outside are people who present as men. So I think that's a common misconception as well, is that people are perpetrators of violence outside, but a lot of them are instead the victims. So I kind of see a breakdown on that line, but I could get to the exact numbers later, and on our reports they have it, but you have maybe more expertise on it.
Well, so I've been in this field a long time. I started off at a domestic violence organization and then worked at an organization where we did do a lot of housing work. My stats are a little bit old, but it depends on if you're looking at the folks who are unsheltered versus sheltered. Mm-hmm. When you look at the overall community of who's homeless, it is actually a majority of families, women, and kids. Mm-hmm. And it's a pretty high majority. It's like usually at year to year, it's between 60 and 75% are in that group. But when you look at the folks who are on the streets that are more visible, it is more men. And that a lot of times the families with kids will do anything to not be visible. You know, we have a lot of folks who come into Metro Caring. I can think of one mom, she lived with her 4 kids in her car for like 9 months, but they hid, right? They were in church parking lots or in suburban cul-de-sacs because they didn't want to be targets of violence. They didn't feel safe on the street, so they just tend to hide more.
Great point, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that piece about mental health and its correlation or lack thereof with homelessness. That's definitely something I've heard and believed, that mental health issues have been a perpetuator of homelessness. So kind of getting more into that, can you speak more to, like, because I see the connection of like, oh, maybe it's harder to get a job or maintain relationships. So I wonder if you could just speak more about how it's not the mental health piece, but it is the housing market or finances. Like, what is the mental health piece, and kind of break that down?
I'm going to say a little bit, and then I'll pass it off. I'm going to tell you that when we talk to folks in our community, they're spending 80% of their rent, 90% of their income on rent, 80% of their income on rent, 70%, and there's just nothing left over. And so you're very precarious. You're very housing insecure. So one other thing comes up. You have a kid who needs emergency dental work. You have a car that breaks down and you miss work and you don't have unpaid leave. You get sick and you don't get paid for those days, and then you're not making your rent. And it's very easy to fall behind and to get evicted. It's just in the last year or two, and we've actually partnered to try to get some legislation passed to make it more difficult for folks to get evicted and to be given chances to catch up and to not have onerous fees put on top. Because a lot of times it would be like, okay, well, it's $100 a day for every day you're late on your rent or something like this, right? And that adds up really fast. It's really just basic math. People aren't able to make ends meet. My mom once said to me, she was like, well, they just need to budget better. And I was like, I said, let's sit down and do this. You know, when you were a waitress at that, fried chicken restaurant in 1983, what was your salary or wages? What were you bringing home? And what was the cost of our 2-bedroom house? And, what was this expense, that expense? And I said, and what are those things today? And it just doesn't work. The math just doesn't work. You would have to work so many hours, 99 hours. How many of us have that time, right? So if you're not earning a higher wage, if you don't have the privilege of that, it's just that you can very quickly and easily fall behind, and then things compound. And there's a lot of penalties, right? You're late on a parking ticket, it increases. You're late on anything you're late on, those fees just continue to add up, and then you're constantly playing eeny, meeny, miny, mo every month. You spread out your bills, and you're like, okay, well, what can we afford to pay? And that game just doesn't work well, and you lose every time.
Yeah, extremely well said. And layering in mental health crises. So I'll tell a story of someone named Matthew, since we're discussing Matthew. When he was 18, went to college and had a psychotic break. It's very typical for young men especially to have psychosis if they have schizophrenia or something like that, to have psychosis or have the original impact of schizophrenia at that age. Went to college, came home. 2 parents, wealthy, very, steady jobs, engineers, whatever, were able to have him stay at home for the next 10 years, so until he was 28. And he got a job at Goodwill, was working, because they have the program for people who worked a steady job, worked 50 hours a week, became a manager, worked up through the ranks, was on his parents' health insurance until the age of 26. Well, schizophrenia medication in particular, as well as some of the medications for other conditions, as you may well know, but schizophrenia medication in particular can run up to, right now, I think, $800 a pill. So without insurance, and you take it every day or twice a day, without insurance, it's not feasible. So when he was off his parents' health insurance, was working at Goodwill, was budgeting well, was supported by a loving and caring family infrastructure, they were able to make things work, make ends meet, have him enroll in Medicaid, help him navigate each system and all of that stuff, until one of the parents got sick and they could no longer care for him or have him live in the house. So now, no health insurance, no housing, it can start to go to his job, but then experiences the impacts of schizophrenia. That is the difference between being housed with a mental illness and being unhoused with a mental illness. If you're unhoused with a mental illness, you probably appear like many of the people that we see on the street. You're in psychosis, in crisis. And it's traumatizing for the people experiencing it. But if you're housed and have a family infrastructure, support, it's still traumatizing, it's still a difficult condition, as with many other conditions, car accidents that change your life and your ability to move throughout the world. If you are housed, it is a protective factor, and it's not visible. So we see people who are in the worst time of their life, we see them outside. And that's the difference between housing and no housing. So it's a complicated issue, and I'm glad you asked the question, because it is what most people say, well, they're mentally ill, otherwise they wouldn't live outside. Well, maybe there's all these other factors that are contributing.
I do just want to share, too, that I had a former board member who was a psychiatrist who specialized in street psychosis. So there's also mental health there's mental health challenges simply to living on the street. The trauma of not being able to afford housing, the facing the elements, the daily fight for survival, the being invisible to other people and society, the violence that can happen because you're exposed and you're vulnerable, creates trauma, and it can develop into a very own, it can create mental health issues simply being unsheltered.
Great point. Thanks for adding that.
Yes? Yeah. I just wondered if you could speak briefly to the increase in need that Metro Caring has been seeing, even before the SNAP disaster, and how you're responding to that increased need.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So we've been seeing over the last several years, really since, so when we had the pandemic, we had a huge spike in need, and then there was a large federal response where there was the child tax credits, there was something called pandemic EBT, which means that people's food benefits, their benefit levels were increased, and so they had enough to actually buy groceries. So then there was a short period where things kind of leveled out, and we were doing pretty well in terms of our numbers and able to kind of have the capacity to meet that need. Then the child tax credit went away about 2.5 years ago. And then the pandemic EBT went away. And at that same time, inflation kept climbing. And those monthly food bills kept growing. And so we've been seeing just increased need. And then on top of that, a compounding factor was when Governor Abbott was busing the migrants up, and we at Denver had one of the highest per capita rates of folks coming in, and so we had, I think, 40,000 people at the peak coming into Denver, and already kind of creating another layer of pressure on our systems. So all of these trends meant that we were already running on fumes and working really hard to keep our shelves stocked. We are spending now like 20 times more than when I started 8 years ago at Metro Caring on food. And sometimes when you come in and you look at our shelves, you would not guess it because they look bare. They look like I'm a child of the Cold War. They look like the propaganda pieces that they'd show us of the Soviet grocery stores. And it's heartbreaking because families are relying on us, and the food inventory is unreliable. The other factor that's been happening is as tech has increased the capacity for retailers to have near-time inventory, they are donating less. They have less waste. And so our retail donations have crashed. So all of these things came, we're on the train tracks, and it's like that cartoon where it's driving toward the cliff edge and you're like, oh no. And then they, unfunded SNAP and did not fund TFAP, which is the government commodities program that we often use to stock a good portion of our shelves. And so right now we're seeing, the exponential need through the roof, and working really hard to try to meet that need. We did a campaign recently and raised some funds to be able to stock our shelves, and we've added a Monday box distribution for 500 folks to come in and get box distribution on Mondays. And then moved those appointments in and pressed them into the rest of the week, the people who had been scheduled on those Mondays. So we're increasing our capacity by about 65% through the end of this year, while folks catch up from, everything that's been happening, and we hopefully can catch up a little bit. They're making some permanent cuts in SNAP, and so if those do in fact become reality in the coming year, I think we're going to be seeing elevated need for quite a while, and be kind of, running hard to try to keep up with it.
I just wanted to add one quick thing. Metro Caring and other organizations, food organizations, did the majority of the work of responding to SNAP. We obviously saw it, but we don't provide immediate food needs except in our residential properties and treatment facilities. So one thing I'll say is that we did pass Proposition LL and MM, which is great, and will feed children and keep food in schools that we already budgeted for. One thing I'll say about Colorado is we do fight back against some of this federal disinvestment. However, as you may know, we are sort of cut off by the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, so we have to have our any tax increase, we have to have it on the ballot. Well, voters get tired of increasing their taxes, where in other states, they would just increase the tax without letting the voters know. Voters have this feeling, I'm just always being asked about my taxes. Well, so if you can educate your neighbors and friends, things like Prop LL and MM, which I think coincided with the crisis enough that people were like, we're not going to defund more food for children. But if you can educate your neighbors and friends and family about the reason why you see so many tax increases on your ballot is because of this policy instituted in the 80s that just doesn't reflect reality, and we cannot get rid of it because of a lot of things. We're working on it, but that's something to keep in mind, that our power to fight back against federal disinvestment is kind of limited by this policy that you may well be aware of, but just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to bridge off the finance issue, the figure that you put up there, $12,000, that you were able to support a family. When you look at the amount that you're doing, I'm just curious, what are your funding sources, and is there things that we can do as a concerned church to be able to support those?
Yeah, I'll start off. So we do get federal funding quite a bit. We get state funding, and we get funding from donors and from individuals. We have a multi-stream source of funding because we work in property and healthcare. We have kind of these like larger, Medicaid is one of our largest. We bill Medicaid for our services. So this investment that we're seeing, and the bill, I don't call it the big beautiful bill because it's horrible, but the bill is going to cut some of that, and so we're going to be relying more on individual donors and community support. But I'll say, I think that's a great question. What can we do? That is always what the question we get, and of course, we welcome and accept donations. A lot of what we can do as a community is work to prevent homelessness before it starts. You made a great point of, we're on a hamster wheel of sorts. How can we as a community step up and say, hey, I notice my neighbor is they're not around that much anymore. Like, they're kind of in their house a lot. Can we go check on them? Can we bring them something? Like, we have people, our family members, our friends, our literal neighbors who, you saw that statistic, 5,142, maybe I made that part up, but 5,000 something people experiencing homelessness for the first time. Maybe that's one person who, if someone had reached out and said, hey, I'll pay that parking ticket for you. I'll pay that parking ticket for you so you don't miss rent and get evicted, then maybe we wouldn't have so many people depending on services like ours. So while I hate to say that, it's a multifaceted approach, and I think a lot of it is based in what you're doing right now, being a good community and being supportive and reaching out to help people before the issue coalesces.
Yeah, I think those are great points. At Metro Caring, we have a mixture of funding sources. We do have some federal pass-through. We did lose one grant earlier in our year. And so, we are experiencing some hit from that as well as increased expenses. I will say that, I've been at Metro Caring now through the pandemic and now through the current times, and it's individuals that step up and our partners and community that step up that keep us going. And so it's volunteers. We rely on the equivalent of something like 34 full-time volunteers in volunteer hours. If we had to hire that amount of folks, we'd almost double our staff, and that would mean a huge increase in expenses. So volunteering is a huge thing. Especially on those Monday shifts, we don't have quite enough folks, and we have shifts almost every day of the week. Donating is a huge help. I know that different communities come together and volunteer as a group. I think that those are the near-term things, and then the long-term thing is continuing these processes of getting yourselves educated, advocating, being involved in the work, in the policy creation, and making sure that we try to build a framework that is more just.
I'm so sorry we are at time and we have,
no
I know
way.
there's more questions. I know, I'm so sorry. If you guys could stay just a few minutes after and people can come up and talk with you, that would be fantastic.
Sure.
Thank you.
Susie and Doug, I'm very sorry. But thank you for coming. Let's give them one more Montview thank you.